I never thought I'd sit here and record something like this. After years of listening to other people's darkest confessions, I swore I'd never share one of my own. But this one has stayed with me in ways I still don't fully understand. And before I go further, if stories like this, real human confessions and psychological nightmares, are the kind of content you want more of, don't forget to subscribe. It helps more than you know. Now let's begin. I was in my 8th year of practicing psychiatry when he walked into my office. At that point, I thought I'd seen just about everything. Severe depression, obsessive-compulsive spirals, violent trauma survivors, people drowning in grief, so thick it felt like smoke filling the room. But I'd never met anyone like him. He introduced himself as Daniel, mid-30s, a little underweight, pale in a way that made you wonder if he ever saw the sun. His hands trembled slightly as he set them on the armrests of the chair, but his eyes were steady. Too steady. Most patients start with hesitation. They fumble. They test the waters to see how much they can share before you recoil. But not Daniel. The very first thing he said was, "I think about killing people. Every day." I didn't flinch. At least not outwardly. Years of training condition you to hold steady, to keep your face neutral, no matter what you hear. Inside, though, my pulse quickened. I reached for my notepad, forcing my pen to move at a calm, measured pace. "How long have you been having those thoughts?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly, like the question amused him. "Since I was a kid," he said. "But lately it's different." "Different how?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice even though we were alone in the office. "They used to be fantasies. Faces I invented. Strangers. Now it's people I know." That was the moment I felt a shift inside myself, a subtle tightening in the air. Every psychiatrist knows the difference between intrusive thoughts and actionable intent. One can be managed, treated, understood. The other can spiral into something irreversible. I asked him the necessary follow-ups. Did he have a plan? Did he have a target? Did he own weapons? To each, he shook his head. Calm, almost too calm. No plans. No guns. Not yet. He paused, then added, "But sometimes I look at them, and I wonder how easy it would be to just do it." I should pause here and explain something. In psychiatry, you walk a razor-thin line. You're a doctor, yes, but also a gatekeeper. If a patient poses a genuine threat, you have to decide, report them, institutionalize them, break confidentiality. It's never an easy decision. And with Daniel, it became a nightmare. Over the next few weeks, he kept coming back. Every session, he spoke more openly. He described the rush he felt when he held eye contact too long with a coworker, the way his hands itched when he saw someone vulnerable on the street. At first, he framed it as fear. Fear of what he might do. Fear of losing control. And part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to see him as a man terrified of his own impulses. But the more he talked, the more I realized it wasn't fear keeping him awake at night. It was fascination. There was one session I'll never forget. He walked in, sat down, and without preamble said, "Do you ever wonder what it feels like to have someone's life in your hands?" I kept my voice even. "Is that something you've been thinking about?" His lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. Constantly. And then he said something that made my stomach drop. "I don't think I want help. I think I want permission." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying his words, the way he said them. So deliberate, so certain. I'd handled violent offenders before. Patients court-ordered into therapy after assaults. But this was different. Daniel hadn't done anything yet. At least, nothing he admitted. There was no crime, no victim. Just words, just thoughts. But I knew, deep down, I knew I was sitting across from a man balanced on a knife's edge. And if he tipped, someone would bleed. The next morning, I went through his file again. No history of arrests. No official record of violence. Just one note in his intake forms that stood out. His mother had died when he was 12. Cause of death, undetermined trauma. I made a call to verify, pulling public records. What I found made my throat tighten. His mother's body had been discovered at the bottom of a staircase in their home, officially ruled an accident, unofficially whispers of something else. But Daniel was a child. No charges ever filed. I closed the file, hands trembling, because suddenly the thought wouldn't leave me. What if that wasn't an accident? By week 6, I was unraveling. Every session with Daniel felt like walking into a room where the walls were slowly closing in. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't violent. But he didn't need to be. His calmness was the threat. One evening, he told me about a dream. "I dreamt I was sitting where you are," he said, voice flat. "And you were sitting here, in this chair. And I was asking the questions, writing the notes, watching you squirm." I asked him how that made him feel. He smiled for the first time. Wide. Too wide. Powerful. Here's the thing people don't realize about psychiatry. You're not just listening. You're absorbing. Session after session, you take in other people's pain, their fear, their darkest impulses. You carry it with you, whether you want to or not. With Daniel, it was more than carrying. It was drowning. By the end of the second month, I found myself checking over my shoulder in parking lots, double-locking my office door, flinching when the phone rang, because I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just confessing to me. He was rehearsing. And worse, he was rehearsing with me. That's where part 1 ends. And it's only the beginning of what became the most disturbing, consuming encounter of my entire career. I thought I could handle it. After all, I'd managed patients with violent thoughts before. But Daniel was different. Every time he left my office, the air felt heavier, like he'd left something behind. Something I couldn't shake off. One night, after a particularly unsettling session, I stayed late at the office. My notes in front of me, a half-empty cup of coffee gone cold. I replayed his words. "I don't want help. I want permission." That sentence echoed in my head like a ticking clock. I wrote in his file, "Patient presents escalating fixation on violent fantasies. No explicit plan, but increasing lack of resistance. Possible risk to others." It was the kind of note that could trigger a chain reaction. If I reported him, he could be placed under observation, maybe even detained. But the evidence was thin, nothing concrete, just confessions in a private office. And if I pulled that trigger too early, I'd lose him as a patient. Worse, he might disappear into the world with no oversight at all. So I told myself what so many psychiatrists before me had told themselves: one more session, one more week. Let's see where it goes. The next week, Daniel walked in wearing the same clothes as before. Same gray hoodie, same black jeans. I started to wonder if he even owned anything else. But what struck me wasn't his clothes. It was the way he looked at me before sitting down. His eyes lingered too long, studying me like I was part of his experiment. "Rough week?" he asked casually. It caught me off guard. I was supposed to be asking him that. "I manage," I said carefully, shifting the focus back. "Tell me about your week." He leaned back, fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. I noticed something. People don't pay attention. Not really. You can stand right behind someone, breathe down their neck, and they don't notice until you want them to. My pen hovered above the page. "And did you do that this week?" He tilted his head. I thought about it. He smiled faintly, as if testing me, waiting to see how I'd react. I kept my face neutral, but inside my chest tightened, because I knew what he was doing. He wasn't just fantasizing anymore. He was practicing, rehearsing in small ways. The line between thought and action was thinning. That night, I couldn't shake him from my mind. I dreamed about him, sitting across from me. Only this time the notebook was in his hands. He was writing about me. When I woke, the sheets were damp with sweat. My wife stirred beside me, asking if I was okay. I mumbled something about stress and rolled over, staring into the dark. I had to remind myself, he's just a patient. This is projection, countertransference. Terms we use to remind ourselves we're not the ones unraveling. But deep down I felt it. Daniel was bleeding into my life. 2 sessions later, he said something that shook me to the core. "I watched a man on the subway yesterday," he told me, his voice flat. He was asleep, his head tilted back, mouth open, completely vulnerable. and I thought if I put my hands on his throat, no one would stop me. My throat went dry. Did you? He looked almost disappointed. No, but I thought about it the whole ride. I forced myself to nod, to scribble something in my notes. My hand shook so badly the words came out jagged. He leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. You ever think about it? He asked suddenly. The question hit like a punch. Think about what? I managed. Killing someone. His tone was casual, almost conversational. Not doing it. Just wondering what it would feel like. I froze, because he wasn't just probing anymore. He was pulling me in. I shook my head slowly. That's not my role here, Daniel. But he smiled, like he knew something I didn't. Everyone thinks about it, he said softly. The difference is, I admit it. That night, I sat in my car long after leaving the office. The steering wheel cold under my palms, headlights from passing cars streaking across my windshield. And the terrifying thing was, he wasn't entirely wrong. Every psychiatrist knows the truth. Violence exists in all of us. Most people bury it, suppress it, wrap it in layers of morality and social conditioning. But it's there. The difference with Daniel was that he let it breathe. And worse, he wanted me to admit I could feel it too. By the end of the 3rd month, I was unraveling. My wife asked why I was so distracted at home. My daughter asked why I didn't smile anymore. And I couldn't tell them. I couldn't bring Daniel into our house with words. But I carried him anyway. One evening, after a session, I stayed in the office to review my notes again. I flipped through weeks of scribbles, each one darker than the last. Fantasies turning into urges, urges turning into rehearsals, and one phrase, repeated more than once, testing boundaries. That's when it hit me. Daniel wasn't coming to me for help. He was coming to me for permission. Every confession was a step closer to action. Every silence on my part was validation. And I had to ask myself, was I helping him resist or giving him the freedom to escalate? The breaking point came in week 14. Daniel walked in, sat down, and without hesitation said, I followed someone home yesterday. My pen froze above the page. What do you mean followed? I mean I trailed them from the train station, watched what building they went into, what floor they lived on. I stood there for almost half an hour, just thinking. The room went cold. I steadied my voice. Did you go inside? He shook his head slowly. No, but I could have. He leaned forward, eyes burning with something I still can't name. You understand, don't you? The power of knowing you could. That's almost better than doing it. For the first time in my career, I felt genuine fear in my own office. Not of what he might do to someone out there, but what he might do to me right then. My throat tightened. My hands trembled under the desk. And he noticed, because Daniel smiled. He'd found a crack. That night, I sat at my desk long after everyone left, staring at his file. The ethical lines blurred until I couldn't see them anymore. Confidentiality was sacred, but so was protecting lives. And the truth was, I didn't know how much longer Daniel would be content with just watching. By then, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just his psychiatrist. I was his witness. After 14 weeks with Daniel, I knew I was standing on the edge of something irreversible. It's a strange feeling as a psychiatrist, knowing the difference between thoughts and actions is paper thin, and you're the one holding the paper. Every rule drilled into me from training clashed with reality. I could report him. But report what? That he followed someone home. That he thought about killing a man on the subway. None of it met the threshold of imminent threat. Not legally, but morally. Morally, it was a ticking bomb. And the truth is, I was afraid the bomb wasn't only in Daniel. It was in me. The next session, he arrived early. I'll never forget that detail, because Daniel had never been early before. He was always precise, arriving at the exact minute, never late, never early. But that day, he was waiting in the hall when I opened the door. Doctor, he said calmly, stepping inside. I forced a smile, gesturing him toward the chair. My pulse spiked before I even closed the door. He sat, hands folded, gaze steady. Do you believe in fate? I froze, pen hovering. What do you mean? He shrugged. that some people are destined to meet, not because they want to, but because they're supposed to. I wrote a note, but my hand shook. And you think that's what this is? You and me. His smile widened just a fraction. I don't think. I know. For a moment, the air in the room thickened. The walls seemed closer, and I realized Daniel wasn't just talking about therapy. He was binding me into his narrative. I wasn't his doctor anymore. I was his accomplice. Later that night, I poured myself a drink in the kitchen. My wife asked why my hands were trembling. I told her I was tired, but it wasn't exhaustion. It was fear, because I'd started to notice something. The things Daniel said, the imagery, the way he described power, control, silence, it had started echoing in my own head. At the grocery store, I'd catch myself thinking about the distance between people's backs and my hands. On the train, I'd notice how vulnerable someone was when they leaned against the window, eyes closed. I never wanted to act, not once, but the thoughts were there, and that was enough to terrify me. Week 15. Daniel didn't sit down right away. He walked slowly around the room, eyes scanning my bookshelf, my diplomas. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what your patients think about when they're sitting here, while you're scribbling away in that little notebook?" I kept my voice even. "Sometimes." He turned, staring at me. "Do you wonder what I think about?" I met his gaze. "I think you want me to ask." His lips twitched into a smile. "Maybe I do." He finally sat, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "I think about you, about how much you write, about what would happen if someone else ever read those notes." I felt my stomach clench, because in that moment, I realized he wasn't just fantasizing about strangers anymore. He was studying me. "I'd never let anyone read them without your permission," I said carefully. But Daniel shook his head slowly. "That's not what I mean. I mean, what if the notes weren't yours anymore? What if they were mine?" The room tilted. He was warning me, or threatening me, or maybe both. That night, I drove aimlessly for hours after work. My wife called twice. I ignored both, because I couldn't bring Daniel into my house, not even in conversation. But the truth is, I was already bringing him home in silence. The walls of my own home didn't feel safe anymore. The shadows in the hallway stretched longer. The sound of footsteps above me, even when I was alone, made me flinch. I was unraveling. Week 16. Daniel walked in, sat down, and without preamble said, "I picked her." My pulse shot up. "Picked who?" He leaned back. "The one I followed last week." I saw her again. Same train, same building. It felt like it was meant to be. I forced myself to keep my tone level. "What do you mean, picked her?" He smiled faintly. "It means she's the one." Every nerve in my body screamed at me to call the police, to break confidentiality, to do something. But the way he said it, the calmness, the certainty, it pinned me to my chair. I managed to whisper, "Daniel, are you saying you plan to harm her?" He tilted his head, considering me like a puzzle. "Plan? No. Plans are for amateurs. This isn't a plan. It's an inevitability." I gripped my pen so tightly it snapped. He smiled at the sound. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, Daniel's file open, staring at the words I'd written over months. Each entry was a breadcrumb trail, leading here, to this moment, and I realized something that hollowed me out. I wasn't documenting him anymore. I was documenting the countdown. The next session, I tried something different. I asked him about his childhood, his parents, his first memories of violence. He didn't flinch, didn't resist. Instead, he smiled. "Finally," he said softly, "you're asking the right questions." And then, for the first time, he told me about his father, a man who drank too much, hit too hard, apologized too little. Daniel described the first time he saw blood, his own nose broken at age 7. The first time he felt power, holding a knife in the kitchen, knowing he could use it, even though he didn't. And the first time he realized silence was its own weapon, when his mother begged him to tell the truth, and he said nothing. By the time he finished, my throat was raw, because I understood. This wasn't a monster sitting across from me. It was a boy who'd learned survival through violence, who'd grown into a man that saw control as the only antidote to chaos. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. But pity is dangerous, because pity softens the edges. And Daniel saw it in my eyes, which meant he knew he had me. The following week, he arrived with something in his hand. He placed it gently on the table between us. A key. I stared at it. What's this? He smiled. To the building, where she lives. My blood ran cold. Why are you showing me this? I asked. His eyes locked on mine. Because I want you to understand. You're not just listening anymore. You're part of this now. I didn't touch the key. I didn't write in my notebook. I just sat there, pulse thundering in my ears, realizing the truth. This wasn't therapy anymore. It was complicity. And whether I wanted it or not, I was already in too deep. The key sat on my desk for the rest of that session, gleaming under the fluorescent light like a loaded gun. Daniel didn't touch it. Neither did I. He didn't need to. Its presence was enough. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about confession anymore. It was about control. He wanted me to know, to feel his power, to share the weight of his choice. And it worked, because from that day forward, everything changed. I couldn't walk into my office without feeling the echo of that key pressing against my mind. When patients spoke, I nodded, smiled, scribbled notes, but all I heard was Daniel's voice, calm and steady. She's the one. I started forgetting small things. Appointments, phone calls. Once, I even left a prescription and signed on my desk. Rookie mistakes. Mistakes I hadn't made in years, because my mind was elsewhere. It was in that apartment building, on that train platform, with a woman who had no idea her life was dangling by a thread, and that the thread ran straight through me. Week 17. Daniel arrived on time, sitting like always, posture perfect. He smiled. You didn't use the key. I forced myself not to react. It wasn't mine to use. He leaned forward, eyes locked on me. Exactly. That's the point. It's never yours. It's always mine. I decide who breathes and who doesn't. You just observe. My throat tightened. Daniel, this is serious. If you're threatening someone's safety, I have to report. He cut me off with a laugh. A sharp, clean sound that froze me in place. Doctor, come on. You won't report me. If you wanted to, you already would have. The fact that you're sitting here, across from me, proves it. He was right, and he knew it, because at that moment, I couldn't tell if I was still his doctor or his hostage. That night, I stared at my wife across the dinner table. She was talking about work, about some argument with her boss. I nodded at the right moments, but my mind wasn't in the room. All I could think about was Daniel's laugh, the way it split me open, the way it told me, you've already lost control. Week 18. Daniel walked in, calm as ever, but this time, he didn't sit right away. He stood by the window, staring out at the parking lot. She got into her car yesterday at 6:47 p.m., he said softly. I froze. He turned, eyes sharp. Do you know how long it takes someone to unlock their car door? For seconds, if they're not paying attention. 7, if their hands are full. That's an eternity. I swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this? He smiled faintly. Because I want you to understand how close I am. How close we are. My chest tightened. Daniel, this is escalating. This is dangerous. He shrugged. Of course it is. That's the point. And then he sat, calm, relaxed, like he hadn't just confessed to stalking this woman step by step. I realized in that moment, he wasn't fantasizing anymore. He was rehearsing, and I was his audience. That night, I couldn't shake the thought. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while my wife slept peacefully beside me. And I wondered, what if he did it? What if tomorrow I saw her face on the news, lifeless, a victim of another random crime? Would I be complicit? The answer was yes, because I knew, and I did nothing. That thought hollowed me out like nothing else. Week 19. Daniel came in with a different energy. Charged, excited. He sat down, eyes bright. I followed her again last night. I gripped my pen. Daniel, you need to stop this. right now. But he only smiled. She dropped her groceries. Ken's rolled across the sidewalk. She bent to pick them up. Do you know what that looked like, doctor? Vulnerability. Pure, helpless vulnerability. And no one was there. No one but me. My voice cracked. Did you hurt her? He leaned back, savoring the tension. No, not yet. The silence after that was unbearable, because in that not yet, I heard the inevitability of everything I'd feared since the beginning. After he left, I sat in my office for hours. I thought about confidentiality, about ethics, about the oath I'd sworn. But most of all, I thought about her. A woman who didn't even know my name, who didn't know she was sitting at the center of a storm neither of us could stop. I had two choices: break the law and report him, or do nothing and hope he didn't cross the line. Either way, I'd lose. Week 20. He entered, calm as ever. But there was something different in his eyes. Triumph. He sat, leaned forward, and whispered. I touched her. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? He smiled. On the train. I brushed against her arm. Just a second. But it was enough. She looked at me. She saw me. And now, she'll never forget me. My heart pounded in my chest. Daniel, this has to stop. You're crossing lines you can't come back from. But he just smiled wider. You don't understand. That's the whole point. There's no going back. That night, I wrote my resignation letter. I didn't send it, but I wrote it because I knew the truth. Daniel had pulled me so far into his orbit that I couldn't see a way out. And worse, he knew it. The next week, he didn't show. No call, no message, nothing. I sat in my office, staring at the clock as the minutes bled away, and the thought hit me like a hammer. He wasn't absent. He was busy. That night, I barely slept. I jumped every time the phone rang. I scanned every news headline, searching for her name, her picture, her fate. But there was nothing, which was worse, because silence wasn't relief. Silence was dread. And in that silence, I realized Daniel had me exactly where he wanted me. Not as his doctor, not even as his accomplice, but as his prisoner. I didn't hear from Daniel for 3 days. 3 days of silence. 3 days of scanning the news, gripping my phone so hard it left marks on my palm. Every article felt like it might carry her face. Every notification sent my pulse racing. But nothing came. No headlines. No bodies. Just silence. And the silence was worse, because it meant the story wasn't over. It meant he was still out there, deciding, calculating, savoring. And all the while, I was trapped in my own head, wondering if I had already crossed the line from doctor to accomplice. On the 4th day, he returned. He walked into my office like he owned the place, calm and collected, as though he hadn't left me dangling over a cliff for 72 hours. He sat down, leaned forward, and smiled. You missed me. I swallowed hard. Where were you? He tilted his head, feigning thought. Let's just say, I've been busy. My hand shook as I gripped my pen. Did you hurt her? The smile widened. Why would you assume that? Because that's what you've been building toward. He let the silence hang for a long moment. Then he whispered, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. The beauty is, you'll never know. Not until I want you to. I felt something snap inside me. Weeks, months of control, composure, professionalism, gone in an instant. I slammed my notebook shut. Enough. This stops now. Daniel didn't flinch. If anything, he looked amused. You think you can stop me? You can't even stop yourself. That night, I sat in my car outside the apartment building. I told myself it was to protect her, to warn her, to do something, anything, before it was too late. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was no longer there as a psychiatrist. I was there as something else, something darker. I watched the windows, every flicker of light making my heart race. Every shadow on the street made me tighten my grip on the steering wheel.